The small, desolate town of Marfa, Texas, had always been shrouded in mystery. For decades, travelers and locals alike had whispered tales of the eerie phenomenon known as the Marfa lights. These glowing orbs, dancing across the barren desert, were said to defy explanation. Some believed they were spirits of the dead, others thought they were the work of aliens, and a few even claimed they were a curse laid upon the land by ancient tribes. Whatever the truth, the lights had an undeniable pull, drawing curious onlookers and daring adventurers to the desolate plains. One such adventurer was Claire, a journalist known for her fascination with the unexplained. Claire arrived in Marfa on a cold, moonless night. The town was quieter than she expected, its streets empty and its buildings dark. Her breath misted in the air as she parked her car outside a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The motel clerk, an older man with a weathered face and wary eyes, handed her the key without a word. "You here for the lights?" he finally asked, his voice low and gravelly. Claire nodded, sensing the unease in his tone. "Be careful," he added, almost as an afterthought, before disappearing into the back room. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire spent the next day interviewing locals. Most were reluctant to talk, their faces clouding with fear at the mention of the lights. One elderly woman, Mrs. Ramirez, finally broke the silence. "The lights have been here long before us," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not of this world. Some say they're the spirits of Apache warriors, cursed to roam the desert forever. Others believe they're the souls of settlers who perished in the harsh wilderness. But whatever they are, they're not friendly. People who get too close, they don't come back." That night, Claire drove to the viewing area just outside of town. The desert stretched out before her, vast and empty, its silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. She set up her camera and waited. Hours passed, and just as she was beginning to think the lights were nothing more than a myth, they appeared. At first, they were faint, barely visible against the dark horizon. But as she watched, they grew brighter, their colors shifting between red, blue, and white. They moved erratically, sometimes hovering, sometimes darting across the sky. Claire's heart raced as she captured the phenomenon on film, her earlier skepticism melting away. But as the lights drew closer, a sense of unease settled over her. The air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could hear a faint hum, low and resonant, that seemed to emanate from the lights. Suddenly, one of the orbs broke away from the others and sped toward her. Claire stumbled back, her camera forgotten, as the light stopped mere feet away. It hovered there, pulsating with an otherworldly energy, before shooting back into the night sky. Shaken, but exhilarated, she returned to her motel, eager to review her footage. The next morning, Claire discovered her camera had been wiped clean. Every photo, every video she had taken was gone. Panic set in as she realized her laptop too had been corrupted. It was as if the lights had erased all evidence of their existence. Determined not to give up, Claire decided to return to the desert that night, this time armed with backup equipment and a renewed sense of caution. She also reached out to a local guide, a young man named Miguel, who claimed to have seen the lights up close. "They're not just lights," Miguel warned her. "They're alive, and they're watching us." Miguel led Claire to a secluded spot deeper in the desert, far from the official viewing area. "This is where they're strongest," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The two sat in silence, the weight of the darkness pressing down on them. Hours passed, and just as Claire began to lose hope, the lights appeared again. This time, they were brighter and more numerous, their movements more deliberate. Miguel's face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a small crucifix. "Don't look directly at them," he warned. "They can take you." Ignoring his warning, Claire focused her camera on the lights. As she watched, she began to notice shapes within the orbs, fleeting images of faces and figures that seemed to be trapped within. One face, in particular, caught her attention. A young woman with hollow eyes and a look of utter despair. A chill ran down Claire's spine as she realized the woman's lips were moving, forming words she couldn't hear. Suddenly, the lights surged forward, surrounding them in a blinding glow. Miguel screamed, clutching his crucifix tighter as the air filled with a deafening hum. When the lights finally receded, Claire and Miguel were alone in the desert once more. But something was different. The ground around them was scorched, and the air smelled of ozone. Miguel's face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. As they made their way back to the car, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of her vision, and the faint hum of the lights lingered in her ears. Back at the motel, Claire tried to make sense of what had happened. Her equipment was intact this time, but the footage she reviewed only deepened the mystery. The lights were there, but so were the faces, dozens of them, their expressions frozen in anguish. She realized that the myths were true. The lights weren't just a natural phenomenon. They were a doorway, a trap for lost souls. And she had come dangerously close to joining them. As she packed her bags, ready to leave Marfa for good, she couldn't shake the feeling that the lights weren't finished with her. They had let her go this time, but she knew she had been marked. As Claire drove away from Marfa, the horizon lit up with the eerie glow of the lights. They followed her for miles, a silent reminder of the secrets she had uncovered. She vowed never to return, but deep down she knew the lights would haunt her forever. For in the desolate plains of Marfa, the line between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone dared to imagine.